Welcome to episode 151 of Awkwardly Awesome Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Freeman. Today we're talking about the subject of radical accessibility. And I was thinking about it in my own life and thinking, Jason, you've been lucky enough not to have to use it that much. But shortly before this, before we're talking right now, I had an epiphany like, oh my gosh, you use radical accessibility all the time. And for me, it comes in the form of having a computer. I'm a writer as a big part of what I do, and my fine motor coordination isn't such that I would want to write longhand for hours at a time, and I'd be very slow at it. So having a computer has really, literally made a huge part of my life and my career accessible to me. And my guest has, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to talk with her. She has so much more to share about this. So I'll be back to talk with her, but first,
today's guest, Molly O'Connor.
welcome back to Awkwardly Awesome Podcast. Let me tell you briefly about Molly O'Connor before I bring her on, but first I'll start with a quote of hers. Imagine if every time you left your home you had to consider all of the obstacles, excuse me, all of the obstacles that could keep you from reaching your destination. Imagine if every building, every sidewalk, every mode of transportation was a potential barrier to your independence and your freedom. Now imagine the same for the digital world. Potential barriers to social media, to videos, to tools and technology you may need to do your job well, or even to get an education. Molly said this during her TEDx talk earlier this year in Sioux Falls. There are over 1 billion people with disabilities in the world. Yes, you heard that right. 1 billion with B. They make up the world's largest minority group. Most people know someone with a disability, and if they are lucky enough to live a long life, they will likely develop a disability themselves. Yet, considering all of this, the world is largely built considering people with disabilities as an afterthought. Molly O'Connor is an advocate for radical accessibility, someone who uses her skills as a graphic designer to work collaboratively, creating digital and physical spaces where access is not a burden or an afterthought. It's an integral part of design and seen and celebrated as a human right. As Associate Director of Design and Accessibility at Lemonly, a design agency in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Molly specializes in accessible and inclusive storytelling storytelling for some of the biggest brands in the country. Please help me welcome Molly O'Connor. Hey,
Thank you, Jason. That was a wonderful introduction.
you're welcome, and thanks for being here on the Ugly Awesome podcast, Molly.
I'm so honored to be here.
First of all, your TikTok is brilliant. It was fun to watch. It was great to watch. One one of the lines, one of your lines that struck me was that disability catches up with everyone if they are lucky to live long enough. Could you say a little more about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, one of the most striking things somebody once said to me, so I share this, is that uh, having a disability, that is the only minority group you could join as soon as tomorrow. You know, that we don't think about that. We often go around with blinders on and just, we go about our day and don't consider accessibility, but it could be your entire world as soon as tomorrow. And as we age, we develop disabilities. That's just the natural aging process, and that's a reality of life. And so, again, another thing that most of us don't consider. Now, the reason to consider and to implement accessibility into the things that you create is not for yourself or your future self, but for the people who need it today. But I think it's a really just an incredible point to make that really, I think, stops people in their tracks.
Your dad joined the minority of having a disability very suddenly when he was in college.
That's
What
right. Yeah.
what
Oh, go
what
ahead.
what happened to him? Yeah.
He when he was a sophomore in college, he was in a car accident. And what happened was he lost the ability to move his right arm and had to have it amputated. He was a farmer at the time. He farmed with his family, and it was very dangerous to have a limb that you couldn't move. So he had it amputated. I'm sure that was an incredibly difficult decision to make, and had to function with just his left arm. And I never knew him any other way. You know, this was college. He had me much, much later after that. And so I always knew my dad to have this limb difference, and watch him navigate the world with just the left arm, which, of course, was a different experience for him than somebody with two arms, but I think was even more challenging on top of having one arm because it was his left. And so many things are designed for people who use their right hand. So, on top of things being built for people who have two hands, one-handed things that were built for people using one hand were built for right-handed people. And so that's often a way I connect with my audience too when I'm explaining accessibility, because a lot of people know that experience.
How did how did how did he adapt to this sudden very sudden change in his life?
I think it was slow going at first. He wrote a couple books, and my dad's not with me today. He passed away in 2020, but I read through the books as I was writing about this and trying to understand his experience. And there was a quote that hit me, and he said that he relied very heavily on vice grips and Velcro strips for a very long time. And, his entire life, honestly, he always had to figure out workarounds when possible. And so growing up, I kind of started to understand the world of disability as one where the person with the disability needed to alter and reimagine things to fit them, and not the other way around. Not that the places making the products should understand accessibility. So I had it backward because not everybody can reimagine and alter products. But my dad was fortunate to be able to often, and so that was the experience that I kind of witnessed in my childhood. Jumping ahead in time a little bit further, that accident that he had caused a rare disease that eventually took his hearing, and so he became deaf. And that was yet another disability that he had to learn to live with, and that one was a much different experience, partially because it happened so much later in his life, and so many of the things that would maybe help somebody who's deaf, like sign language or cochlear implant, which he had and it failed, didn't really work for him. So that was another example of him experiencing a disability, but this one didn't really have any workaround. So that one was it was hard to witness and to not be able to do anything to help.
It must have been so hard. How did you? Was there a way you found personally to communicate with your dad?
Well, so he could kind of read lips, and he had, very, very small amount of hearing. So if you spoke really loud, right in his vision, close, he could still communicate. But it took him away from anywhere where there's any sort of background noise, people with certain pitches of voices, anytime more than one person was talking. It took away music, movies, things like that, the things that he loved or enjoyed previously in his life. And so that's, I think, one of the biggest, watching that evolution and that change, and feeling really helpless as I was there for it, is what really triggered the passion I have now for accessibility, because I finally made the connection. It took me a really long time, but I finally made the connection that as a graphic designer and a digital creator, that I am making things that include or exclude people, just like my dad. And I had the choice to continue to just make things without considering accessibility, or to make it the most important thing when creating the things that I make.
You founded and Lee Lemonley's Dive Task Force. What is that?
So the DIVE task force at Lemonly stands for Designing Inclusive Visuals for Everyone. And so basically what we do is we make sure that the things that we make at Lemonly, that they are accessible. We, like you mentioned in my bio, I work with some of the biggest brands in the country, and they have these vast audiences from all over the world, and their accessibility is absolutely crucial in order to reach those audiences or their full potential. So at Dive, we just make sure that we are doing the very best we can, that we are up on the best practices, that we are teaching our team how to make accessible products, make accessible work, and we're just like really making sure we're touching every part of the company and running well in the accessibility sphere.
Sounds powerful, and think about how that ripples out to impact so many people's lives. Wow.
We hope too that other agencies and other designers and animators and writers and doing all the things that we do here are paying attention, because this is a secret sauce that we want people to steal. We want to be used as an example, and a model for accessibility, and so that other people create accessible work too.
You don't need to name the company, any companies, but can you just talk generally about an example of a specific project you've worked on? Because sometimes I think, at least I know for me, when I hear accessibility, sometimes it seems overwhelmingly broad.
It is. It impacts everything, right? So, um, at Lumenly, we are dealing specifically with digital accessibility. What we do is we say that we are storytellers. So we take brands' stories and we write them in ways that are we rewrite them, I should say, in ways that are interesting, that are easy to follow and digest and understand in plain language. We illustrate them. We illustrate, the things that are happening in the copy, but also any sort of data that needs to be illustrated to drive the point home. And how we make that accessible is we make sure that, we're always doing things like checking color contrast for people who are colorblind or have low vision. We're making sure that our text is live or actual text that can be read by a screen reader. So a screen reader can read these stories. When we're making work that's interactive or web based, we make sure that if there are any buttons, that they are large enough that somebody can interact with them and touch the button. We're making sure text is big enough to be legible on mobile, things like that. So we do that for every client we have, and it just makes sure that we are reaching as many people with a broad spectrum of abilities, and really not, we don't want to exclude anybody, right?
This sounds like the sometimes implementing the things seems like it would be overwhelming, but what you just described, it sounds like it requires attention to detail and in design and consistency, but that is not like an overwhelming thing.
It's not. It requires building in the accessibility from the beginning of a project. It requires some education to learn how to do the things, which we are severely lacking in our educational systems. I touched on this on my TEDx talk, but I wasn't taught anything about accessibility. It wasn't even mentioned in my education, and um, that's the story with a lot of people. And so you do have to kind of find your own teachers and your own resources. Luckily, they're out there. They're all out on the internet. And if you're lucky to have a computer and the internet and have that accessibility, like you spoke about, then you can access it and you can learn it. So as long as you're aware of it and you kind of know the things to watch out for, it is easy to build in. And another point I have to mention, I like to make to designers who maybe were taught to make things that look good, that are following the principles of design, and that are aesthetically pleasing, is that some people are like, well, if I do this to make it accessible, it doesn't look as good. I have to mess up my design. But I really believe that if something isn't accessible, that is not good design. So in order
Mm.
to make good design, you have to build in accessibility from the beginning.
It it makes so much sense on so many levels, including that someone who buys a product might experience a life change and suddenly have a disability. So they even need a product that they previously bought to be accessible.
Absolutely. And, this is another point I like to bring up. accessibility also benefits people in situational limitations. So you don't have to have a disability today or even tomorrow, but you can still benefit from accessibility. A really good example of this is in physical spaces are the push buttons you use to open a door. Those were created for people who use a wheelchair, right? But I use them all the time if I have my hands full or if I'm pushing a stroller or things like that. So that's a wonderful example of accessibility for situational limitations. And another one digitally that I use is captions. That's a
Oh,
really personal one to me because that affected my dad greatly and they weren't often available at the time when he needed them. Um, so it really bugs me when they're not available, but also I use them all the time because I just don't want to turn on the sound often. Or, I'm scrolling in bed at night and I don't want it blasting in my ear. I just want to read the video. So there are a lot of reasons you might use accessibility. Um, but I'd like to also have the caveat that those are bonuses and not a reason to include accessibility. For the people who need it, that's the reason, right? It's just a bonus that it affects so many other people or benefits so many other people as well.
but to keep the eye on, like, accessibility literally could make a difference between someone's life working the way they wanted to and not working. That's huge.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah, I think I liked the point you made about having your computer and the accessibility that brings you. The pandemic has brought on such an awareness about accessibility in terms of being able to meet virtually, like we are doing today. Some people don't have the option for many reasons of being able to go to a space to meet to somebody or to be on your podcast and meet in person. That's maybe not an option, but we now function so much better virtually that I think that's really benefited people and brought a lot of awareness to accessibility in the physical space.
So, so Molly, you were going along in life on a certain career path, and was that like a turning point that made you go, "Hey, I want to devote my career to working on accessibility"?
Yeah, it it hasn't changed my career path in the large scheme of things. I'm still designing, right? I'm still creating digital work. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I after losing my dad, I it became clear to me what I needed to do or what was important to me. And that this was important work that fell within my skill set and my expertise. It was something that I could become good at and teach others. And so I'd been looking for that thing my whole life and I liked design, but I was never really figuring out exactly what my niche was or what my calling was. And so when I figured this out, I really did hit the ground running, and I was like, "This is it. I'm going all in. I'm going to speak about this. I'm going to practice it. I'm going to teach it. I'm going to do everything I can to further this space and to create as much awareness as possible."
What would you say to someone who's in a career and thinks they're doing the right thing, thinks they're doing the thing they want to do, but they haven't found that unique space within that field yet? What words of encouragement could you offer them?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It can feel really discouraging, right? I think I'm gonna quote you. Uh, I think don't be afraid of doing your imperfect best.
Hmm.
Uh, that can be a huge roadblock, right? For me, at first I was like, well, I'm not an expert. An expert is somebody who's lived and breathed this for 20 years, or, knows this exact type of accessibility inside and out. And so really trying things and just going full speed ahead if it feels right, and learning it as you go is just the very best thing you can do when trying to figure out your passions. And then, if it doesn't work, if that's not the thing, you try it and it doesn't work, try something else. Don't be afraid of failing. And something my dad taught me is don't stay in a career path that makes you unhappy.
Mm. Um, so, I thought I had another question related to that, but maybe I'll come back.
Sure.
You said on a board, for people with rare disease, what is the board called again?
It's called Rare by Design, and one of my good friends, Kendra Gottslavin, started it. We're only a couple years old now, but it really fits into the things that I'm passionate about, and their mission is just incredible. The work that we're doing, we're doing things in the community that are just not being done, and so I'm so glad that we're filling that space and creating a lot of awareness about rare disease and disability.
What has being on that board taught you about accessibility and design?
So I think a large part of my education about accessibility is learned directly from people with disabilities who use accessibility firsthand. It's such a big part of their lives.
That's a good
Um,
place to learn.
that's where you should start always. And so being on the board and working with people with disabilities has been the most educational and eye-opening and wonderful experience. I can't say I've done a ton of design on the board, but I've helped with different events. We do the Style Show, which is an inclusive fashion show here in Sioux Falls, where people with disability, I mean, every person is represented as much as we can. And we feature accessible clothing, and we bring awareness like that to the community. And we also show different brands in town that carry these, or I'm sorry, stores in town that carry these brands. So we're just trying to show that these things exist, that accessible clothing is a thing, and that it's important and we should have it here, and these guys are doing it great, and things like that. And yeah, just the different types of projects we work on are so fun. I have to put a plug in, and of course I don't have the date handy, it's in October, but our next event that we're putting on is an art show. We are partnering with a group in town called Untitled 10, and it is an art show, photography based show,
Mm.
featuring models with visible disabilities. And we are going all out. We have some wonderful grants to make this thing really cool. And we're going as far as to make sure that the experience in the space is accessible too, like the tags. You can use a QR code to listen to the tag description and the alt text of the images, things like that. So,
Wow.
um, yeah, it's cool. We do cool things, and so it's always changing, and we're new. So who knows what we'll be up to next year. The Style Show is a constant, but you never know what's going to come next, and like how we can reimagine creating awareness and bringing accessibility to the community.
I had Kendra on the show a while back, so I don't know the episode right off the top of my head, but for the viewers, look for the episode. It's a great one.
Yeah, I checked it out. She mentioned it, so I checked out that episode.
Um, I remember also what I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned imperfect best, and it seems like the to people with a business, that can be quite a bit of fear around making things like accessible, as like, am I am I doing it right? Am I doing it perfectly? And if I'm not, I'm bad, and the shame, and oh my gosh. What would you say about that? How can we turn accessibility into more of a design question, and yet of a and less of a personal failings type question?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, okay, so we're all going to get accessibility wrong from time to time, especially when we're
Mm.
starting out on that journey. That's just the way it is. But to try and to do less than perfect is so much better than to not do it at all. And
To
I
try and do less than perfect is so much better than not doing it at all. Wow.
absolutely, yeah. Um, I think that's how we learn too, right? Is to make the mistake. And I love feedback uh, from people who know the accessibility space better than I do about, how the thing I made could be done better, or the the words I'm using could be more sensitive or said in a better way. I'm always improving and I'm getting that feedback. And I think the biggest thing is just to not be, I'm a sensitive person, uh, but to not be too sensitive and to feel like it's a personal attack, and understand that that feedback coming in is just going to make you better at what you do.
So, along with this, what would you say to a business manager, an employee who does get feedback from someone with a disability, that something could be improved, needs to be improved? How should they handle that interaction, and then what should they do next?
Sure. I'm sorry. Can you, the question about accessibility, doing that better, or you said disability?
So say someone who's using a wheelchair goes up to a manager of a restaurant and says, hey, you don't have any booth or tables that are accessible to me. How should that manager, how could the manager best handle the interaction to empower the person making the observation, and then to improve things?
That's a great question. I love that. I think, like I said before, not to take it personally, I think when we should all be challenging businesses to do better with accessibility, and businesses and brands. And if you are a business or a brand and you receive that feedback, you're lucky. That's wonderful because people are saying it whether you're hearing it or not. So you're being brought that feedback directly, and you had the opportunity to do something to make it better. Uh, I think that person is a good person to maybe keep a connection with and get their feedback and ask them to kind of, would you recommend something? And just because maybe that person is using a wheelchair, maybe they don't want to be your personal guide into accessibility, but give them that option if they want to give more feedback. Um, I think it's so important, especially because, you know, businesses do legally have to comply with the ADA, the American Disabilities Act, um, that they don't just say, well, it's compliant, it's ADA compliant, because that does not mean it's truly accessible or a space that makes people with disabilities feel humanized when they use it. And so if somebody with a disability calls it out, or without a disability calls out something that's inaccessible, I think not to be defensive and to be receptive in any way you can is the most important thing you can do.
And thank you so much for bringing this up. Would you say what's good and what's working about the ADA, and then also what and then also what more can be done to make the world radically accessible?
Yeah, absolutely. So the ADA was passed in 1990. I have it in
And
front of me.
that's the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Yes, yes. And essentially, it's prohibiting discrimination against people with disabilities and requiring reasonable accommodation for those with disabilities to have equivalent access. And I do not want to badmouth the ADA because thank goodness for the ADA. The ADA is a wonderful thing. But as with anything, and especially something that it was passed in 1990, it needs to continue to evolve, right? And unfortunately, because it's a legal requirement, often individuals, businesses, brands, they use it as a box to check, a legal checkbox that if they can do XYZ in the ADA, like compliance requirements, that therefore they've done everything well, right? And then they never think about it again. They don't, even with feedback, they don't care that it's done. It's accessible according to the ADA. And so
If they check that box, they feel legally safe.
they
Legally
are,
safe.
right? Yeah. And that's what matters to them often. And so that extra feedback of, hey, this isn't actually accessible, or, this isn't equal or equitable, the experience, they don't hear that anymore. So both graphic designers, architects, digital physical spaces, we all can do better. And that's why I put the radical in front of accessibility, because it's more than just checking that box and saying, I'm done, I got it, it's accessible, because that isn't often true when it comes to ADA compliance.
What you're talking about really sounds like kindness. How do we be just another form of kindness, another form of courtesy almost?
Yeah, it requires some empathy, right? um, I haven't figured out how to create empathy where there isn't any, but I
Hmm.
think, there are 1 billion people in the world with disabilities. It goes back to that. We all know somebody with a disability. I think sometimes it takes us reaching into our own lives and understanding that we love somebody who needs accessibility. That helps build that empathy and makes us go like, yeah, this is why we should do it. We shouldn't have to have a personal reference like that, but that is often something that I bring up when I'm trying to make the point about why accessibility is so important. But I think another point is you're catering to an audience that is often ignored or overlooked. So even just in terms of making money, there is an audience to tap into there that is being ignored. So if you want to broaden your audience, broaden your customer base, whatever that business might be, accessibility is important.
Yeah, I know if I went to a business and I felt unwelcome because it just wasn't accessible. And there was a business across town that was accessible and welcoming. I'm going to the accessible business time and time again, and that I mean this does translate as the kind thing to do. It's the right thing to do, but it also really does translate into economic and
Absolutely.
impact and
Yeah,
financial.
absolutely.
So there's so many dimensions to this, and we only have an hour, and I want to cover celebrate a few more. For instance, what has your daughter taught you about accessibility? First, tell us just like how old is your daughter? Just very briefly about her. And
Yeah, yeah. So I have, she's now 5. She turned 5 in June, a daughter, and, um, I think that's such a wonderful question, Jason. I think one of the biggest thing she's taught me is to reframe how I see things and how I observe. Um, she sees things that I've seen a million times and I stop noticing. And that includes things that are accessible, or asks why something isn't accessible. So that's a really big way that she's impacted me. But um, an example that I often like to use when I'm talking about accessibility is the captions, um, with videos. And something that I learned was another way that these accessible captions are useful for other reasons, and that is having a 5-year-old or 4 or 5-year-old kind of starting to learn to read or to recognize
mm,
words.
mm,
And so I always say that, when we do TV time at home, we turn on those
mm,
captions so that she is not just consuming the images, which, you know, is what it is, but that she's also maybe seeing some words and starting to recognize and hear them and see them at the same time. Um, so I think that's something that I didn't anticipate learning. Another way that this accessible feature could be used, but it's just been really really fun to learn through her eyes and
mm,
understand the world differently.
mm, mm. It it's such a good example of how with captions, I mean, whenever we design something kindly, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm starting to think whenever we design something with kindness, maybe that has a ripple effect. And
Absolutely.
And with captions, how about people who from a different country who are trying to learn English?
Mhm.
Huge,
Absolutely. Yeah,
huge.
it is huge. And captions also could be used, you can for your own videos, there are so many, sites out there that if you ever needed to have subtitles, that you can create those too. So just it ties us all together and makes everything more accessible.
Gosh, I am. You personally, you've gotten me thinking more of the stuff I put out is accessible, I and I have to really think about that. Thank you very much. Uh,
Absolutely. We all have to start somewhere, but you have auto-generated captions always on social media, so that is a good place to start.
the auto generator worries me a little bit with my voice because Alexa and I don't always. She doesn't always understand me exactly. So, but yeah, I have to think about that. I'm glad that's that. So how long ago did you start on this journey ju- of of doing accessible design?
I think my first exposure to it would have been maybe in 2018 or 19, but I didn't go full force into it and start really learning and consuming it and practicing it until late 2020, early 2021. Like I said, it kind of coincided with losing my dad and just really kind of wanting to channel that energy into something good, into something that would help um, help people and help people like my dad who could have used more accessibility in the digital world. So, yeah. So I've been doing it a few years, but I have a lot of learning to do still.
So you've been at this a few years, and what was it like to create oh to be learning and designing, and then get an opportunity to do a TEDx talk on the subject? What was it like to create that talk?
Oh man, a whirlwind. I would have never guessed that I would do something like that. Public speaking is not something I am super comfortable with, and so it just never seemed like something in my future. I applied and I was accepted, and then I was doing it. So, funny enough, my husband also gave one at the same event.
Oh, that's
So
awesome.
it was an interesting household for a good 3 months as we constantly practice our TED Talks. And my daughter had some of mine memorized too. I did it so many times in front of her. But I mean, she absorbed some of the information for sure. Uh, but yeah, no, I would have never guessed that's something I would have done. And it's just wild where life can take you when you fully immerse yourself and do the thing that you're really passionate about, even when you might have some misgivings about it. Um, it was incredibly rewarding, and I'm so grateful to have had that experience.
So we all, when we get new opportunities, we have a chance to say yes, I'm going to go for this. I'm going to give it my energy, or we have the chance to say no, and then and then kind of give in to our doubts and not either say no and not do it totally, or say yes, but then only kind of do it. What ideas would you have for us about doing something with your whole heart, even if it's challenging, like giving a TEDx talk?
um, I think it's so important to do things that are hard and to do things that are scary. It's easy um, to say no. And I'm the type of person that if I say yes, I'm going to do it full force and like to the best of my ability. And it helped that I knew how big the audience was going to be and that it was going to be published online for a lot of people to see. So that motivated me after I said yes. But I think that barrier to just saying yes is a big one. Jump first and figure it out as you go. I think is my advice, which is scary advice and can get you into some interesting situations. But uh, listen to your gut. You know, you kind of know deep down, even if it's going to be hard and you might kick yourself for agreeing to do it. Um, Nothing lasts forever. You'll get through whatever the thing is, and you'll be better for it. So that's my advice. Whether that's good or not, I don't know. Jump first and then figure it out.
How do you come to say that it's important that people do challenging things? I mean, because so much of society seems built around finding the easy solution,
Mm.
finding the easy way. Why is challenging ourselves so important?
That's a great question. Um, yeah, I think a lot of us function on autopilot. We figure out the easiest path and then we just press go. I think if you want to do something that makes an impact, you have to. You have to challenge yourself to do hard
Mm.
things. Taking the easy way is not going to ever make an impact. Uh, it's just it's rewarding and it's enriching. Like I'm doing something because I care about it and I want to help other people, but it also benefits me. I am so much better for it, and I certainly have more interesting stories to tell because of it. But yeah, it's that's a good question. It's hard to convince people to get out of their comfort zone if they're comfy and they don't want to change things up. And you don't have to if you don't want to. But if you want to make significant change or meaningful impact and change, you gotta get uncomfortable.
Thanks so much. You set me up perfectly for this next question. How do you think radical accessibility helps us? How has it helped you be? How has studying it helped you become more accepting of yourself?
That's a really good question. I think, we're all fighting our own battles. We all have challenges in our life. Um, I think it has helped me become more gentle and kinder with myself,
Mm.
uh, as I would be to somebody else, and more accepting of myself, um, on many levels, things that I would consider shortcomings, or physical appearance, things like that. Where I realize that if I hold myself to the same standards that I hold others, that I should I need to be kinder and more accepting of myself as well.
Mm. So if so giving the kindness out, like designing ki- kindness in the world, which is basically what you're doing. It also helps you be more kind to yourself, and that's of course not the reason you're doing it, but this all ties together. It sounds like.
Yeah, I like that, designing kindness. I
Hmm.
like that phrase.
Designing kindness. So what do you want to see happen in the next 10 years in your career and then more broadly? That's a big question.
That is a big question. I want so much. I want I need to think about that to answer it well. I want accessibility to be more common knowledge. I want people to know what that is and what it entails. That is seems pretty base level, but a lot of people have never thought about accessibility in their lives. So just creating that awareness helps build uh, the the base for accessibility and creating it. I want digital accessibility to be more prevalent. I want to be able to go online and see it being implemented into everything. And that's a tall order because everybody's a creator online. Everybody's making, and you can't possibly get everybody to do it. But you can make a dent in it, and you can start spreading that. I also want to see better accessibility in our physical spaces. We have a lot of work to do in that regard. And I think the ADA could be a part of pushing that, since that is the metric. So I don't know what that looks like yet, but a lot of it is going to take just general awareness and the will to do it. Because if we aren't being required to do it, how are we supposed to know? How are we supposed to know? So you don't know what you don't know. So let's get the accessibility message out there. And most importantly, the biggest thing to do is to involve people with disabilities who use accessibility and learn from them firsthand. That is the I am not the expert, like I can be a sounding, I'm trying to spread awareness, I'm trying to spread the message, and I can make things accessibly, but unless you're using it firsthand for the reason it's made, like you just don't know, you don't fully understand. So we need to get more people with disabilities on boards and get their opinion, get their voice in the mix. Feature people with disabilities in more advertising and in the visuals. Like they just need to be more part of the conversation and the picture.
That's powerful, very, very powerful, very powerful. And it brings up another question I want to ask before we go. What would you today tell someone who experiences a disability, who is frustrated at how inaccessible the world seems to them?
That would be a very understandable frustration because the world is very inaccessible. I think creating awareness any way possible. Like I said, I keep saying that, but that is the first step. You have to build the awareness before being able to teach anything. You have to let people know that there is a need. And I hate to say, I don't want to say, if you have a disability, you have to build that awareness. We all should be building that awareness, but that's a great place to start that awareness. There are wonderful resources and communities online, and that's a good place to also start to like get materials and resources to, okay, here's first steps, here's what I can do. But another good place is just social media. I follow a lot of influencers and creators on social media who have disabilities, who are spreading awareness through social media, just through their Instagram, and just saying like, hey, this is my experience, it should be better. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. These seemingly mundane, whatever, everyday things, somebody with a disability might go, yeah, this is obvious, but I never thought about it. So just finding any path, and social media is a good path to spread that awareness.
Lastly, so in my work, I talk about the power of doing our imperfect best, and what it means to me is we envision the best we want for our lives and the lives of the people around us, and go for that. And when it doesn't work out quite the way we want it, instead of just giving up and saying, we learn from all that and keep going forward. What does doing your imperfect best mean to you, Molly O'Connor?
It means taking up space and and doing work in areas that you might not know absolutely everything about, but
Mm.
doing absolutely everything you can and learning everything you can as you go. Um, Especially in the space of advocacy, advocating for accessibility and awareness for people with disabilities. It's not a group I identify with. So I'm always going to be doing a very imperfect best. But I know the work is important. And I know that um, that even my imperfect best is good. So I just keep going.
Thanks so much, Molly, for the work you've chosen to do, and for sharing both your vision and very, very practical stories with us today. Thanks so much
Thank
for
you,
being on
Jason.
ARC.
I'm honored to have been here. Thank you.
Well, it's it's so inspiring talking to people who challenge you, and and Molly challenges me. I have a speech impediment, of course, but I don't think that much at all about accessibility on a daily basis. But no, now I will more. Let's learn from each other. And inspire each other to grow. Thanks so much for tuning into our Really Awesome podcast. Um, and thanks for being here. Tune in for another great episode next week.